Okay. So it's Chomsky and the poverty of the stimulus, and the first thing you should take home with you is that uh, Pullum's article begs the question almost right away, because he takes for the poverty of the stimulus argument the question of whether there's enough negative evidence to decide a rule, and the poverty of the stimulus argument is the absence of negative evidence. The analogy with Gödel is this. Don't panic. I'm not going to talk about Gödel's proof of uncomputability, but if you remember, the essence of it was that whenever you take a piece of arithmetic or a formal system that includes arithmetic and you do the Gödel number on it, so you come up with a statement in that system that says about itself, I can't be proved, and it's true, right? You don't have to. I think somebody was ready to commit suicide just because of Russell's paradox, but you certainly don't have to commit suicide because of this, because if this is an important thing, you can just add it to your axioms. The only trouble was, of course, that if the unprovable statement is added to your axioms, then that generates another unprovable statement, and it just keeps on going like that. So whereas you can save that statement, if this is an important mathematical truth and you can't prove it, then just throw it in with your axioms and you've got it. You're going to get another one that's also not provable. And that's also true here, which is that whenever somebody comes up with a particular rule of Chomsky's that that you find evidence for, the way that Pullum does with his corpora analyses, you can say, okay, fine, that one you have negative evidence for, but you have an infinity of others that you don't. It doesn't solve the problem. It's just one particular case. It's very similar to the fact that if you have a violation, by the way, it works the other way around. If you have a violation of UG that you'd like to make proper English, you can make it proper English. We can, if English were spoken in Libya, Gaddafi could declare, starting today, who did he think that went right, that went out is correct. And if anybody tries to say, who did he think went out, instead of who did he think that went out, he's shot at dawn. Everybody would quickly shape up, and who did he think that went out would be fine. And in a few generations, we wouldn't even know there was anything wrong with that. The trouble is, it's just one little piece. The rest of the UG structure that's hanging on it, etc., wouldn't change. All of the other stuff would remain illegal. One particular thing would have been declared arbitrarily legal. And that's the way things are with UG, right? And that's related also to the underdetermination, which I talked about already, so I don't have to go through this again. I gave you the complexity theoretic definition of underdetermination, an algorithm, the simplest solution. No, let me put it another way. The best theory, the most parsimonious theory to account for infinite data is the shortest one in terms of bits. That's the complexity theoretic definition of simplicity. But as I showed you in the dictionary minimal grounding set example last week, the smallest number of words, for example, from which you can get to all of the rest by definition is not necessarily unique. There may be, at the same cardinality, minimal cardinality, there may be hundreds, maybe thousands of combinations of those words that will all be enough to get you all the rest. So when you have one particular theory, it's not necessarily the right theory. It may be the right length, which is the shortest, but it's not necessarily the right one. And it's even worse than that because, as I said, God doesn't necessarily always work with the shortest possible theory. I can give you afterwards, after it's over, if you ask, why it's still methodologically better to shoot for the shortest theory and not for a longer one. The simplest version is the argument against Freud, which is that, I'll give it in astrological terms. If you have a choice between answering the question, why did the chicken cross the road? By saying, he crossed the road because he wanted to get to the other side and his moon was in Leo, right? It's cheaper to say he just crossed the road because he wanted to get to the other side. If you add, and his moon was in Leo, you're making it unnecessarily more expensive and kind of irrefutably more expensive, because if it's enough to say he crossed the road because he wanted to get to the other side. If that's enough to explain it, then the moon in Leo is just sort of extra stuff, and you may as well add 2 Leos, and you may as well add the id, ego, and the superego if you're bent on that. Anyway, that's going by too fast. So the poverty of stimulus we've already discussed, and what I want you to remember for the rest of your life is that the poverty of the stimulus argument is about the absence of negative evidence, not about how much negative evidence is enough. Nativism and empiricism, Chomsky did not enter this game with a predetermined notion that I'm going to be a nativist. He entered it trying to explain grammatical capacity. He explained it with UG, and he found to his surprise, or maybe not to his surprise, who cares, that it was unlearnable. And the reason it was unlearnable was because of the poverty of the stimulus. There isn't negative evidence. The child produces and hears only UG-compliant sentences, so he can't learn the rules from what he learns, and therefore UG must be inborn rather than learned. Or if you prefer the longhand version, it must be innately primed rather than data-drivenly learned. Okay. And it's all about positive and negative evidence. It's negative evidence that's missing, and if you want to keep intuition pumping in your head about negative evidence, think of my example of Lelek. Try to figure out what Lelek means when all you see is positive examples of Lelek. But bear in mind stuff that Steve Roy mentioned, which is that if the lay of the land is such that even though everything you point to is Lelek, there are nevertheless non-Leleks, and the non-Leleks are sufficiently unlike the Leleks so that having seen nothing but Leleks and having been told nothing but this is a Lelek, this is a Lelek, this is a Lelek, this is a Lelek, etc., at the end of the day, when you encounter a non-Lelek, that would be so strikingly different, like small and big, that would be enough to give it to you. That is in principle possible, but I don't think it applies to UG. Or to our textures. I mean, with our textures, it wouldn't help you, and with UG, it wouldn't help you because UG is so complicated, and these start utterances, who did he think that went out, etc. They don't stand out like the difference between black and white or between a zebra and a giraffe. The syntax and semantics thing, I just want to tell you that the original idea for modularity, which was the autonomy of syntax, the idea that syntax really, not just language, but syntax is an organ. UG is an organ that's inborn, right? That's based on a very strong distinction between syntax and semantics, which works in mathematics, but doesn't work in natural language. So besides the escape route that's there that I described to you with negative evidence generated by expectations, right, that you never verbalize. I mentioned that there was this possibility that you could have unverbalized expectations. Another escape route that I haven't gone over, although it's related to symbol grounding, might be that one of the guides to what's well-formed and ill-formed, what's UG-compliant and not UG-compliant, may be non-syntactic, may be semantic. It may be something to do with the meaning of the expression that distinguishes. But I haven't worked that out, and I consider that to be a pygmy objection. I wouldn't. A pygmy escape route. Next week, the feeling function problem, which is a real hard problem, whereas the Chomsky thing may just be a seemingly hard problem.